Sources telling us on ET Now that macroeconomic growth continues to top the Modi government's priorities for NDA 3.0. And we also know that the amendments in the IBC Act, when it comes to insolvency, that particular law, when it comes to capital reforms, the digital public infrastructure, all of those will continue. And so will a modest disinvestment target going ahead. Besides that, energy transition goals are expected to be on top of the agenda of Modi 3.0. Let's discuss this and the implications this would have with an economist, founder and economist of Nikore Associates, Mitali Nikore, with us. Great to have you with us again, Mitali. Mitali, in terms of policy continuity, one of the key items that one would want to see continuity on is the manufacturing push that the Modi government has stood for steadfastly. Do you see any roadblocks in that, in coalition politics? And if so, what kind of impact would it have on India's growth story?
Hi, Vikram. Interesting times. I don't think many of us expected to be here today to be discussing, the coalition. So I think it's quite interesting. But very honestly, at this point in time, if we look at the GDP growth numbers that have just come out, the GDP growth stood at 7.8%. And it was actually fueled by, for the first time, I would say, in many decades, the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector growth this time stood at 9.9% of GDP. I mean, that is something which has not been achieved in the last maybe even a full decade. So I think the combination of the production-linked incentive scheme, the logistics policy, and a look at how can we create more and more linkages with MSME sector has brought us to this very positive point. I really don't see many roadblocks in the manufacturing space. However, what I do see instead is more of a requirement to come to a particular state. Say, for example, Andhra is a state which, where Hyderabad is now ceased to be the capital of Andhra Pradesh. There's a need to develop, Andhra Pradesh's infrastructure. The TDP in a very strong position could ask for, a larger piece of the pie when it comes to manufacturing and, attracting investors to the state. And similarly with Bihar, again, a state which is primarily agrarian, even today, could want to have a bigger piece of the pie when it comes to manufacturing. So I think with this manufacturing sector, there will be no hindrance, and more states will want to have, these investments in their own territories.
But Mitali, what about labor reforms? That's where we're picking up from sources that there could be some amendments. What kind of amendments would you imagine those could be? Because, of course, though we are in the realm of speculation, that's where we need to kind of get our act together, since we haven't been able to work on them as much as we should have in the past.
So, Vikram, I do feel that at this point in time, with this particular configuration of the government, there is a huge amount of support for bringing in the full implementation of the 4 labor codes. But on the other hand, states have their own labor laws because labor is a concurrent subject. So I do think that in the years going ahead, we're going to see much more, of state-based differences and divergences when it comes to labor policies and also on minimum wages. So I do think that going forward, it is going to become important for us to track, how these reforms are going ahead. But I don't expect that there will be very many changes at this point in time in the labor codes, because those have been codified and agreed.
Right.
But in the implementation,
yes,
we might see roadblocks.
What about the rationalization of GST rates? Of course, this requires the support of the states, but it is a GST council, and to that extent, the push that would come from the government side, how much rationalization do you expect to happen? And when it comes to the kind of taxation that we would have as well, what are the kind of changes that you're expecting from the next government?
So, Vikram, very honestly, if we look at the composition and demands of the opposition, that is really where the question has come about GST rationalization. If we look at the coalition partners within the NDA, they have not been amongst the major parties pushing for GST rationalization at a very broad level. Maybe they would want it for one or two commodities which impact their states. But honestly, like more of the GST rationalization push has come from parties like the TMC, where there is a clear stand against how the GST is currently being implemented. So I would say that on GST rationalization, again, quite unlikely to see very many changes. But on tax rates, specifically of certain agricultural commodities, and looking at in the food processing space, and also looking at how the tax rates are being set for corporate taxation, that is something which is a matter of debate, especially corporate taxes, because there's going to be a lot of investment that we can expect, particularly in states like Andhra. And then how those corporate taxes should be treated as something that the TDP kind of a party could put on the table and would want to have some concessions there.
The Capex push from the government side, Mitali, now that has been an important piece. Do you think it's going to be as large in size as it has been in the past, especially when it comes to infrastructure? And when you're looking at the kind of disinvestment targets which haven't been met in the recent past, and not by a large margin, is that something, because we are thinking that there would be more modest disinvestment targets set? That's what we are picking up from sources.
No, absolutely, Vikram. I believe that the Capex push will continue. Okay. I don't think that there will be any change on the Capex push, because frankly, that is one strategy that has served the GDP growth well, the manufacturing growth well. I mean, one of the major reasons why the manufacturing growth has, translated into the numbers that it has is because of the infrastructure investments that we're seeing in, be it in highways, be it in logistics, be it in railways. So I think, that is one area where the government has done well over the last 10 years and will continue to keep on investing. What I do expect, however, is that there will be a Capex push even on the social infrastructure side. And this is, I think, something that hasn't been highlighted enough. But looking at, water supply availability and looking at, even climate resilient infrastructure, that could be something that gets a massive push.
Since we're talking about alliance partners, and very quickly, if you can address this, Mitali, because TDP and Chandrababu Naidu has been a big proponent of building digital infrastructure. He has done it successfully in Andhra Pradesh in the past, and that seems to be more or less in alignment with Mr. Modi's vision as well. Do you see a larger impetus coming through on that count that would benefit the Indian economy, considering that we are a services sector, and that kind of push will really help create more jobs?
Absolutely, Vikram. In fact, I was today itself in some discussions at one of the ministries, and one of the points that came out was that we need to expand DPI for direct benefit transfer massively. And, it has become a strategy for many social sector ministries, which are now having to rethink that, maybe they did not provide services to that extent. And that is what has, come out in the polls, that people do expect more, social protection from their governments. But to deliver this, you do need a very strong digital architecture and infrastructure. So I think this leveraging DPI for DBT, for direct benefit transfers, is going to be a massive theme. And we'll see this roll out not only in Andhra Pradesh, but across the country.
Always rewarding talking to you, Mitali. Thanks so much for joining us with your perspective on economic reforms, its continuity, and perhaps where there might be some permutations and combinations, like my political guests were pointing out as well, some kind of calibration. And is that going to change the growth story that India has embarked upon economically? That remains to be seen. But for the moment, this helps us put things in perspective. Thanks indeed for joining us.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.